Ivory Coast is mourning the words of the country's president, Alassan Ouattara, as he announced the death of the prime minister. 61-year-old Amadou Coulibaly was a favourite to succeed Ouattara in October's elections. He died after falling ill at a cabinet meeting and had just returned from heart treatment here in France. France 24's Marc Perelman joins me now. Marc, if you could tell us more about the prime minister and reactions in Ivory Coast to his death.
Well, the prime minister was the candidate for his party. He was the clear favorite for the election slated on October 31st. He was sick. He had a heart problem back in 2012, and he was in Paris for 2 months after saying he would only stay for a few days. And so there was clearly some worry about his health and whether he could run a campaign and eventually become president. However, he came back on July the 2nd in Ivory Coast, and people thought, well, okay, he seems to be okay. And then he had this health problem and that he could not recover from yesterday during the cabinet meeting. So it's a big shock because people thought he was out of the woods, essentially. And so you have on this very rare occasion, all parties, some in the opposition and even, of course, the party in power, mourning the sudden death of the prime minister, because he was recognized as someone who was maybe not a brilliant politician, but a very efficient technocrat and someone who could make things happen. So it's a big shock. And obviously, this means that everything is up in the air in terms of the upcoming election.
I was going to ask you about that. Where does this leave his party and the elections?
Well, clearly, his party is in trouble because the incumbent, Alassan Ouattara, has said, I'm not going to run because I want a new generation to come to power, and I'm not going to cling to power like many of my peers on the continent. So now he's forced with a new choice because there are no clear candidates. There are 2-3 names around this, but there will be pressure upon him to run again. And so this might change the equation for the party. He will address his party in a few days, and then we'll know more. But clearly, the election is slated October 31st, and you can only become a candidate until August 31st. So it's a little over a month and a half. And it means that really the election is totally up in the air because there's a lot of uncertainty also in the opposition. The former president, Laurent Gbagbo, is before the International Criminal Court. There's an appeal procedure that might take too long for him to be able to run again. But so no one is able to tell you today what will happen. And clearly this death has totally changed the equation in Ivory Coast.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Marc. Now, we're getting new information